has the saga of Fenrir, the wolf who defied destiny in the beginning of time, when the world was still young and the gods walked the earth with steps that made mountains tremble. A creature was born who would forever change the destiny of all beings. He did not come into the world in the golden halls of Asgard, nor under the blessed light of the sun. His origin lay in the shadowy lands of Jotunheim, where the wind whispered ancient prophecies and the stars seemed to flicker with forbidden knowledge. Loki, the shapeshifter with a sharp tongue and heart divided between light and darkness, had united with the jaundiced Angerboda, whose eyes held secrets that not even the Norns dared to unravel. From this union were born 3 children, who would carry upon their shoulders the weight of the end of worlds. Jormungand, the serpent who would encircle Midgard with its deadly coils. Hel, the lady of death who would rule the realm of the dead with an iron hand. And Fenrir, the wolf whose howl would one day make the gods themselves tremble with fear. When Fenrir opened his eyes for the first time, the world seemed to hold its breath. He was merely a pup, small enough to fit in the palms of a hand. But there was something in his gaze that challenged the natural order of things. His eyes gleamed with an intelligence that transcended that of any common animal, and when he looked at the stars, it was as if he could read in them his own destiny written in runes of fire. The gods of Asgard soon learned of his birth, for prophecies whispered through the 9 worlds like dry leaves carried by the wind. Odin, the All-Father, whose single eye saw beyond the present and delved deeply into the fabric of the future, gathered the council of gods in the great golden hall. The words of the Norns echoed in his mind like hammers beating on incandescent iron. The wolf will grow, and when the dark times come, it will be he who devours the All-Father himself on the final battlefield. But Odin was wise and knew that sometimes the way to avoid a destiny is to embrace it differently. Instead of destroying the child while still harmless, he decided to bring it to Asgard. "We will keep the wolf close," he said to the other gods, his voice echoing like distant thunder. "Under our eyes, we can shape its character. Perhaps we can transform what should be our executioner into our most loyal guardian." Thus, Fenrir was brought to the gleaming halls of Asgard, where the air always carried the aroma of mead and glory, and where warriors sang songs of victories that would echo through eternity. Initially, the gods treated him like an exotic pet, a curious creature to be observed and studied. But as days turned into months and months into years, Fenrir grew extraordinarily. He did not grow only in size, though his paws soon became as large as shields and his black fur shone like the surface of a lake under moonlight. He grew in intelligence, in presence, in a wild majesty that made even the bravest warriors of Asgard take a step back when he passed through the palace corridors. His voice, when he chose to speak, was deep as the roar of an avalanche, and his words carried a weight that made the very pillars of Asgard vibrate. Among all the gods, only one dared approach Fenrir without fear, the god of war and justice, whose heart was as brave as his hand was firm on the sword's hilt. Tyr saw in the young wolf not a threat, but a solitary being trapped between 2 worlds, neither totally wild nor completely domesticated. He began to visit him regularly, bringing fresh meat and conversations that lasted until the first lights of dawn painted the sky golden. "Why do you come here?" asked Fenrir on one of those nights, his voice carrying a melancholy that surprised even himself. "The other gods look at me as if I were a storm about to devastate their harvests. You are the only one who sees me as a friend." Tyr smiled, and there was a sadness in his eyes that Fenrir could not fully comprehend. "Because I see in you what the others refuse to see," replied the god of justice. "I see someone who did not choose his destiny, but who still has the power to choose who he will be." These words planted a seed in Fenrir's heart, a seed of hope that would grow even in the darkest circumstances. He began to believe that perhaps he could transcend the prophecies, that perhaps he could forge a different path from the one the Norns had woven for him. During the day, he walked through the training fields, watching Asgard's warriors practice their combat techniques, learning about honor, loyalty, and sacrifice. At night, he ran through the forests that surrounded the realm of the gods, feeling the wind in his fur and freedom coursing through his veins like liquid fire. But as Fenrir grew, so did the gods fear. They saw how he had become larger than any horse, how his steps made the ground tremble, and how his presence seemed to suck the light from the environments through which he passed. They began to whisper among themselves in the corridors, poisonous words that spread like weeds. "He is becoming too powerful? What if the prophecy comes true? What if one day he decides we are not his friends, but his enemies?" Odin, observing everything from his high throne, felt the weight of the decision he needed to make. The Allfather had sacrificed his own eye for knowledge, had hanged himself on the world tree for 9 nights to obtain the runes, had drunk from the fountain of wisdom until it ran through his veins like blood. He knew that sometimes wisdom required choices that would break the heart of any mortal. "We need to contain him," said Odin in a secret meeting with the other gods, his voice heavy as stones falling in a tomb. "We cannot kill him, for that would surely unleash his father Loki's wrath and accelerate our own ruin. But we need to ensure he can never use all his strength against us." Thus was born the plan of the chains. The gods approached Fenrir with smiles on their lips and deception in their hearts, proposing what they called strength games. "We want to test our ability to create chains," they said, their voices sounding melodious as siren songs masking. "Deadly rocks, would you help us by testing their resistance? It's just a game, a friendly competition." Fenrir, still trusting in the word of the gods he had learned to respect, accepted the challenge. The first chain they brought was called Leading, made from the purest iron extracted from the deepest mountains. It was so heavy that 10 strong men could barely carry it, and its links gleamed with a power that made the surrounding air vibrate. "Very well," said Fenrir, allowing them to tie the chain around his paws and neck. "Now we shall see if your smiths are as skilled as they claim." When he stretched, when his muscles contracted and his true power manifested, Leading shattered like dry branches in a storm. The iron fragments flew through the air, tinkling like funeral bells, and the gods feigned admiration while their hearts, filled with terror, impressive, they exclaimed. But their voices sounded hollow as echoes in empty caves. "But we have an even stronger chain. Would you mind testing Drami?" Drami was a masterpiece of divine metallurgy, forged with iron that had been tempered in the heart of dying stars and cooled in giants' tears. It was twice as heavy as Leading, and when it was placed on Fenrir, the very ground beneath his feet seemed to groan with the weight. But again, when Fenrir exerted himself, when he channeled all his wild strength and ancestral power, Drami shattered like glass hitting a rock. This time, however, he noticed something in the god's eyes that made him pause. There was no longer genuine admiration there, only poorly disguised fear and something his wolf heart instinctively recognized: betrayal. "There is a third chain," said Odin, and his voice carried the weight of mountains about to collapse. "Gleipnir. It was forged by the dwarves of Svartalfheim, and they claim that no force in the universe can break it." Gleipnir did not look like a common chain. It was thin as a silk ribbon, soft to the touch as the fur of a newborn pup. But there was something about it that made all of Fenrir's instincts scream in alarm. It had been forged with ingredients that defied logic: the sound of a cat's footsteps, a woman's beard, the roots of a mountain, a bear's sinews, a fish's breath, and a bird's spittle. Things that did not exist, woven into a reality that transcended common understanding. "This chain is different," said Fenrir, his voice low and cautious as the growl of a distant storm. "I can sense magic in it, ancient and powerful magic. If I accept this test and discover I cannot free myself, will you release me?" The silence that followed was so deep it seemed to suck all the air from the environment. The gods exchanged glances, and Fenrir saw the truth written on their faces like runes of fire. They did not intend to release him. This was not a friendly competition, but a prison disguised as a game. "Do you promise me?" insisted Fenrir, and his voice now carried a note of desperation that made even Odin look away. It was then that just stepped forward, and Fenrir saw tears shining in his only true friend's eyes. "I promise," said her, his voice breaking like ice at the beginning of spring. "If you cannot free yourself, I myself will cut Gleipnir with my own sword." But Fenrir knew her too well, knew every nuance of his voice, every shadow that passed through his eyes. "You are lying," he said, and his words fell like stones in a deep well. "Or rather, you are omitting something. What are you telling me, my friend?" But closed his eyes, and when he opened them again, there was in them a resolution that broke Fenrir's heart into 1,000 pieces. "For you to agree to be bound with Gleipnir, I will offer my hand as guarantee. If we try to deceive you, if Gleipnir is truly a prison and not a test, you may tear off my hand with your fangs." The world seemed to stop at that moment. Fenrir looked at his only friend, the only being in all of Asgard who had shown genuine compassion for him, and understood the terrible choice he was making. He was sacrificing his own hand to give Fenrir the illusion of a fair choice, knowing perfectly well that it was a trap from which the wolf would never free himself. "Why?" whispered Fenrir. and there was so much pain in his voice that several of the surrounding trees began to wither. "Why would you do this?" "Because sometimes," replied Dur, carefully placing his right hand between Fenrir's jaws. "Justice requires sacrifices that not even the gods can fully understand, and because, despite everything, you are my friend." Then Gleipnir was tied around Fenrir, and the moment the last knots were made, he knew he had been irredeemably betrayed. The chain did not just bind him physically, it drained his strength, sucked his magical essence, transformed all his power into invisible chains that tightened more with each movement. When he strained to break Gleipnir, when he put all his strength, all his rage, all his despair into that titanic effort, the chain remained intact, and the moment he understood he was truly trapped, that the gods had broken his trust irreparably, Fenrir closed his jaws and tore off Tyr's right hand. In a single brutal movement, the god of justice's scream of pain echoed through all 9 worlds. But it was not a scream only of physical suffering. It was the scream of someone who had sacrificed his integrity for his people's safety. Someone who had betrayed his best friend in the name of a greater good he himself was not sure existed. "Traitors," roared Fenrir, and his voice made mountains tremble and stars flicker with fear. "You break your given word. You dishonor the very values you claim to defend. I was your friend. I trusted you. And you repay me with lies and chains." The gods withdrew, unable to face the burning accusation in the wolf's eyes. They knew Fenrir was right, knew they had violated all the laws of hospitality and honor they held sacred. But fear had spoken louder than justice, and now they had to live with the consequences of their choice. Fenrir was taken to a remote island in the middle of a frozen lake, a place where not even the wind dared to whisper. There, in a cave that seemed to have been carved by solitude itself, he was chained to a rock that had roots deeper than the foundations of the world. Gleipnir was attached to the stone with links that were lost in the depths of the earth, ensuring the wolf would remain motionless until the end of time. To ensure he could not bite or howl, the gods placed a sword between his jaws, with the blade pointing upward so that any movement of his mouth would cause unbearable pain. The blood that dripped from his wounded lips formed a river that the bards would call Van, the river of lost hope, and there Fenrir remained, not for days or months, but for entire eras. He saw the seasons change through the small opening in his stone prison, saw snow fall and melt thousands of times, saw stars be born and die in cycles that lasted longer than entire civilizations. And with each passing day, his rage grew like a fire that feeds on itself. But it was not only rage that grew in his heart, it was understanding, wisdom forged in the iron of betrayal and tempered in the tears of solitude. He began to understand that the gods had not imprisoned him because they were evil, but because they were imperfectly mortal in their essence, capable of terrible choices when fear clouded their judgment. He thought of it constantly, remembering not only the final betrayal, but all the nights when the god had sat by his side, sharing stories and offering genuine friendship. Fenrir began to understand that Dur had paid a terrible price for his participation in the deception, had lost not only his hand, but also his peace of mind, forever carrying the weight of having betrayed someone he loved. During the long years of imprisonment, Fenrir developed powers that transcended the physical. His mind expanded beyond the limits of time and space, allowing him to see through the 9 worlds as if they were open windows. He observed the wars that would sweep Midgard, saw heroes be born and die, witnessed epic loves and tragedies that would make the gods themselves weep, and he also saw the future, the Ragnarok that approached like an inevitable storm. He saw the chains that bound him weakening as cosmic order began to disintegrate, saw the signs that would announce the end of times, the endless winter, the brothers who would kill each other, the sun that would darken and the moon that would lose its brightness. In one of these visions, he saw Odin walking alone through the ruins of Asgard, the Allfather transformed into an old man bent by the weight of his own choices. And in that vision, Fenrir understood something that forever changed his perspective on his destiny. Odin was not his true enemy. He was just another prisoner, chained not by Gleipnir, but by prophecies and the terrible knowledge of the future. As Ragnarok approached, Fenrir felt the chains that bound him begin to vibrate. With a strange energy, Gleipnir, forged with impossible things, began to become possible again as the very laws of reality began to bend under the weight of the approaching apocalypse. On the morning when the rooster Gullinkambi crowed in Asgard, announcing the beginning of the end, when the nameless rooster screamed in hell awakening the dead, and when the blood-red rooster crowed in Jotunheim, summoning the giants to final battle, Gleipnir finally broke. The sound of the chain breaking echoed through the 9 worlds like the first cry of a newborn god. Fenrir rose slowly, his limbs numbed by eras of immobility, but his spirit stronger than it had ever been. He removed the sword from between his jaws, tasting his own blood mixed with cold iron, and for the first time in countless years, could fully open his mouth. His howl, when he finally freed himself, was something that not even the sagas can adequately describe. It was the sound of freedom reconquered, of justice long denied, of destiny finally embraced without fear or hesitation. It was the howl of someone who had found himself in the depths of suffering and emerged transformed. No longer the naive young wolf who blindly trusted the gods, but a force of nature that understood both his responsibility and his power. Fenrir emerged from his prison transformed into a creature that defied description. He had grown during his captivity, not just in physical size, but in spiritual presence. His fur now shone with an inner light that seemed to capture and reflect the very stars. His eyes burned with the fire of wisdom conquered through pain, and each step he took made the entire earth vibrate in recognition of his power. When he arrived at the field of Vigrid, where the final battle had already begun, he found a scene that seemed to have come from the darkest nightmares of the gods themselves. The sky was red as blood, cut by lightning that came not from clouds, but from divine warriors' weapons colliding with force enough to split mountains. The ground was covered with the bodies of the fallen, gods and giants side by side in death's final democracy, and there, in the center of that epic carnage, Fenrir saw Odin. The Allfather was no longer the majestic figure who had ordered his imprisonment. The years had bent his shoulders. Difficult decisions had carved deep furrows in his face and his eyes. Even the one that remained to him shone with a weariness that transcended the physical. He held Gungnir, his spear that never missed its target, but his hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the weight of all the lives he had taken and all the impossible choices he had made. When their gazes met across the battlefield, time seemed to stop. There were no words for the moment, no epic speeches or shouted challenges. There was only the mutual recognition of two beings who had been shaped by destiny into a pattern of inevitable conflict, to protagonists in a cosmic tragedy that neither had chosen, but both needed to play to the end. "Fenrir," said Odin, and his voice carried a sadness that made the very stones weep. "I am sorry, I know," replied Fenrir, and for the first time in eras, there was no anger in his voice, only a deep and melancholic understanding. "And I forgive." These were the last words exchanged between them before destiny was finally fulfilled. They clashed in the center of the battlefield with a force that cracked reality itself, the primordial forces finally free to express all their essence without restrictions or chains. The spear Gungnir pierced Fenrir's flank, but not even the weapon that never missed its target could prevent the wolf from fulfilling his destiny. His jaws closed around the Allfather's neck, and in a moment that seemed to last an eternity and an instant at the same time, Odin, the god of wisdom, war, and magic, breathed his last breath. But Fenrir felt no triumph in that moment, only a deep and complex sadness. He had fulfilled the prophecy, had become exactly what the Norns had predicted, but in the process had discovered something the prophecies never mentioned, that sometimes fulfilling our destiny does not free us. It only transforms us into what we were always destined to be. As Ragnar continued around him, as the ancient world died in convulsions of fire and ice, Fenrir lay down beside Odin's body and closed his eyes. He had fulfilled his role in the great symphony at the end of times, but knew his story did not end there, because from the ashes of the ancient world, a new world would be born, a world where perhaps there would be no need for chains, where trust would not need to be bought with betrayal, where beings like him could choose their own paths without the crushing weight of prophecies. And when that new world was born from the ashes of the old, when the children of the gods built new halls and sang new songs, they would remember the saga of Fenrir not as the story of a monster who devoured the gods, but as the legend of a being who faced betrayal with dignity, who transformed suffering into wisdom, and who in the end discovered that even the darkest destinies can be faced with honor. For this is the true lesson of Fenrir's saga, that we are not defined by the chains that bind us, but by how we choose to break those chains when our time comes. That true heroism lies not in avoiding our destiny, but in embracing it with courage, understanding, and, when possible, with forgiveness in our hearts. And so ends the saga of the wolf who defied the gods. who transformed his prison into a school of wisdom, and who discovered that sometimes the greatest act of rebellion is to forgive those who have wronged us, proving that even at the end of times, there is still room for redemption and hope for a new beginning.